All right, y'all, welcome back again to Transverse News. It's not a good computer day. My computer just is deciding to misbehave, and my program keeps crashing on me. So hopefully with this completely full shutdown and startup, that it'll be more stable. Keep your fingers crossed for us and wish us luck. Let's jump back into the story that I was starting to deliver, and I have no idea how far I got before it crashed, so let's go ahead and start again. Russian President Vladimir Putin has claimed that many of his countrymen who lived abroad are now returning, and it's because it was very difficult to live with unisex toilets. There are no exact figures of how many people have left Russia since Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with estimates varying hugely, but in May, the UK Ministry of Defense put the figure at 1.3 million for that year alone in 2022. And, that if you're not familiar with that, that was because when Putin launched his attack on Ukraine, a lot of the Russian citizens didn't agree with it, but he didn't have enough fighters to have a war. To start a war. And so he started drafting people in, and a lot of people were like, I'm not going to fight this ridiculous war. So they've been leaving the country. That's why you've heard stories of him conscripting prisoners, anybody he can get his hands on, into fighting. Nearly 2 years into the war, some Russian citizens are indeed returning. For some, this is forced because countries are denying Russian citizens visas to live abroad, while others are going back to fulfill familial or job responsibilities. During a televised discussion on Tuesday, Putin weighed in on why he thinks Russian citizens may be returning to Russia. He believes that they're struggling with the prominence of shared toilets for boys and girls in the West, according to a clip that was shared on Twitter by BBC monitoring journalist Francis Scar. This has become an everyday, ordinary phenomenon, Putin said, and for those who left Russia for various reasons, many of them are now returning or are thinking about returning. It's very difficult to live in such conditions for people with traditional, normal human values. Surprise, surprise that Putin would just be a complete douche on that. So did you have anything to add to that one, Alexa?
I was talking about glitchy Tesla androids earlier, or glitchy fascist Tesla androids, which, well, of course it'd be fascist. But anyway, I'm pretty sure he's the king of them all, because, how many fucking times has this dumbass randomly referenced gender identity or sexuality or J.K. Rowling or whatever the hell when defending his own policies and trying to bulk Russia up? I mean, yeah, obviously, the dude's a psychopath in every way, shape, and form. He's invading foreign countries. He is initiating, actual genocide against trans people in Russia in very similar ways to what we're heading toward here. Um, but these random references to gender identity and sexuality in everything he says. I mean, I know that there's a lot of speculation that Putin is not healthy, that he's on his way out. I think this might be evidence of that. Cuz I mean, this is borderline insane to keep trying to make these weird ass claims. I
But
mean, seriously.
and I mean, okay, so yes, people have made those claims about Trump as well, and it's just so funny to see the
Oh, he is
similarity there,
funny.
that the just strange, out of left field, sort of unhinged comparisons, and strings drawn between things that aren't connected.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've seen a lot of that out of Trump. That is for sure. Um, dude started going on about his stupid mental competency tests again. Um, but yeah, I don't know what else to add to this story. This is just Putin being a freaking weirdo yet again. Again, if it wasn't for the rest of the context, it'd be funny almost. People are returning to Russia because they are tired of the gender neutral toilets over there in the West. It's like, what?
Well, and the other thing that just usually, and then there are a couple places where a gender neutral toilet means both sexes use it at the same time.
Right.
Not a gender neutral toilet, but a gender neutral restroom. But you know, the U.S. isn't a big purveyor of those. Like that. That's something you'd see in I believe it's Japan.
I've
And
seen some here. I've
okay.
seen some up here. But
But
yeah,
usually when
it's
it's a
usually
gender
single
neutral bathroom, it's
occupancy.
it's an individual stall that you go in, or it's an individual room that you go
Mhm.
in, you lock the door, and you're just in there by yourself. There's no one else of any gender in there. So it's just yeah, it just adds to how bizarre that statement is. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into our next story. The U.S. Supreme Court has turned down a request to hear a case centered around trans students and bathrooms and the bathrooms they use. I think this is one we covered last time we were on. Martinsville School District in Indiana had appealed to the Supreme Court to hear their case after they refused to allow trans students to use the bathrooms that align with their gender identity. On Tuesday, January 16th, the Supreme Court rejected the Martinsville School District's appeal attempt without comment. The request came after the Seventh Circuit Court ruled that the school district's policy that restricted transgender students from accessing the bathrooms that align with their gender identity would violate civil rights laws. In 2023, the case of Metropolitan School District of Martinsville versus AC was heard by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. The court ruled in favor of the trans students, stating that the school's policy to restrict bathroom access for trans students violated Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 and the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibits sex discrimination at educational institutions that receive federal funding. And then the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment says that U.S. states shall not enact laws that abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor can they deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. So that's really good news that the Seventh Circuit of Appeals courts have upheld the rights of the trans students to use the bathroom that align with their gender, and the Supreme Court has refused to see that case, basically saying we're not going to weigh in on this. The Seventh Circuit Appeals Court decision will stand.
I used to think that it was a little bit pie in the sky to think that the judges and justices would always come in and save us from all of these legislative actions. And it is pie in the sky to say that they do it every time, because that obviously isn't the case. But it is interesting that a lot of the time when they do get a hold of these things, they do tend to side with us. Like, that is interesting. Again, it's not all of them. Some of them, some of these judges, obviously, he's not on a circuit court of appeals, but like you have, for example, Matthew Kasmerick over there in Texas, who every other day is concocting some new way to insert himself into our doctor's office or whatever the case may be that day. But generally speaking, yeah, a lot of courts are siding with us, which is nice to see.
Well, yeah, because
Surprising and nice to see.
it especially with the things, and I've loved this and I've reported on this a lot, the things that they're saying to get these bills passed, the things that they're saying in favor and support of these bills that they're sponsoring, that they're writing, they're bigoted and obviously targeted to a group of citizens. They're clear rights violations. And so when it gets to the actual federal courts, the real courts, a lot of times they can't help but strike those things down because they are very clearly unconstitutional and very, very clearly targeted at a specific group that and infringe on their rights.
I mean, the sad reality is, though, we could easily see a reversal on a lot of these.
Mhm.
Um, we've seen that before with the
Yeah.
Supreme Court, and that they'll turn around and change their mind on something a few months after ruling on it. So, unfortunately, we live in a time where, yeah, the Supreme Court does side with us more often than not, but we also know that they are fully willing to take away bodily autonomy at any given moment. So, you know, we can't trust that these decisions will hold. And
Yeah.
that is the sad part. Every time they go in front of them, they might rule a different way. And
Yeah.
we always have to keep that in mind because precedent means nothing to these people.
Mhm. Yeah, it was just very strange to find how few of our laws or how few of our rights are as set in stone as we thought they were. You know, the flexibility of the Constitution and its ability to protect our rights and expand to include other rights and other things that come up that didn't exist in the 1700s and 1800s. But we've seen that none of that is in stone. None of that is truly set and fully protected. It can flex. It's been scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Kill this. Hold on. Sorry. Yeah. On to our next story. Moving right along at a snail's pace. This was a post from January 17th from Aaron in the Morning. We're still pretty behind on our stories, so we're trying to get through them all and get caught up here. Missouri heard a record 9 anti-trans bills in a single day, including an end to all trans legal recognition and an adult bathroom ban.
So let's talk about earlier. Yep.
Yeah. So that was something that you were able to cover?
No, I didn't cover it, but I did specifically say that there are a lot of states doing what, uh, trying to end all civil rights protections at once
Mm-hmm.
and legal recognition. Again, in line with Project 2025. It's directly in line with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, this comes from Twitter, so you have to kind of scroll through a bunch of different posts.
Right.
They'll be beginning with HB 1519 and 1520. 1519 will allow pharmacists, desk workers, nurses, and more to discriminate against trans people receiving gender-affirming care. 1520 would remove the grandfather clause for trans youth currently getting care. Because remember, when they enacted a lot of these, they tried to enact a lot of these trans care bans for youth, there were clauses in there where if you were already receiving the care, you could continue to, because, doctors have said and screamed over and over again that if you remove the care, it's very harmful for students or for youth. And now they're removing that. Let's see, does she have any others in here that are quick to pull out? What were the other 7? I'm not finding them.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
We'll have to follow
I'll
back
look them
up
up
on
while you're
this one.
talking.
Because that's a lot. But yeah, Twitter's a little hard to navigate on the fly like this. So we'll just go ahead and move on to our next story.
Well, before you do,
Uh-huh.
I will say the Missouri legislature lived to regret doing that because holding 9 hearings in one day, or at least trying to, they didn't, but they were trying to, because the opposition to these bills was so massive and so overwhelming from business business magnate back that business magnates and local government officials and state government officials and medical students and doctors and everyone else, because everyone else showed up to protest this shit. They absolutely live to regret doing this because their session went on for 9 hours and they had to cut it off after, I believe, the third or fourth bill. Like, yeah, they made a mistake by trying to fuck with the trans community like that.
Nice. So they tried to get through 9 bills, just kind of rush them through, and the
Mhm.
community was not having it. I love to hear that. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. It was nice to see the business community stand up as well. You
Yeah,
see
and
that
that's
sometimes. You saw that with the bathroom bans back in 2017 or whatever it was. And you see it on occasion now, but they came out in a big way in Missouri. I watched a lot of it myself.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I wasn't able to follow on that. And it has been really disappointing. The response to North Carolina in 2017 to their bathroom ban was swift. It was huge. A lot of NCAA, a lot of tournaments and concerts and things like that were pulling their business from the state, and it had a very profound and immediate effect on their bottom line, and made them backtrack it immediately. And then since then, I think it's just sort of because it's such a dull drone that there's just so much of it so constantly that the businesses aren't able to kind of pinpoint and take a stand against anything because it's happening everywhere, and it's all terrible. And so it's like they're kind of hamstrung a bit on that.
Yeah, and I mean, it just goes to show that it's like, in 2017, this was a huge fight, these bathroom bills. Now, unless they're like the Floridian bathroom bills that, allow for people to be, arrested for misdemeanors or whatever, um, they are extremely important fights, but they are among the least offensive at this point. Like,
Right.
I hate to say it because it's a huge deal,
Yeah.
but my God, I mean, with everything that has happened, it's kind of like the sports bans. It's like we're so used to hearing about them by now, and we are facing healthcare discrimination, not just in our gender affirming care, but in general healthcare. Trying to legalize that and legalize stripping kids from their parents and put their parents in prison and mandate conversion therapy and all these other removing all the civil rights protections. That bathroom bans are almost background noise by comparison at this point, unless they are extraordinary, like Florida's that managed to capture everyone's attention at once. It's not to say they're not a big deal, but it's just like we have gone so far beyond them at this point that they feel less significant by comparison, at least to me. And I hate that because none of this should be happening.
Yeah. Well, and it was just sort of what they used to pave the way for these other things. It was from there that they were able to move eventually towards, banning trans in public, like Florida's
Mhm.
doing and so many other states are, by labeling it obscene and all of that. And
Exactly.
I expressed it early on in kind of starting this show and reporting on the trans news, how it was really frustrating because you couldn't follow what the narrative was. Like to answer the question why trans people are bad, why trans people are a threat. It was that trans people were just men dressing as women to go in and rape and molest women in bathrooms. That
Right?
was the narrative.
It
And
still
then
is,
and then it
largely.
started and then it started to shift and just sort of go all over, and it's just like, well, if that's the case, then why would you care about trans kids playing sports in third grade? Like, it really, if you put any logic to it, it starts to fall apart. Like, this is just discrimination against a group of people.
Well,
And it's
there's
like,
absolutely no logic to any of this. There never has been. And I mean, it's been nothing but a fire hose of hate. And, and the pressure just keeps getting turned higher and higher. That's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
It turned from a trickle into a deluge within a year, and now we are just in the middle of a never-ending Category 5 hurricane now. I mean, that's essentially what this is at this point.
Yeah. Well, and Vespers brings up a good point. Like, there's been a lot of comparisons recently to, Nazi Germany and the whole thing, and the
Absolutely.
fascism and stuff. But escalation. Vesper says escalation was the playbook used in 1930s Germany too, and
Mhm.
it was so interesting to realize in the last like 10 years that that could be repeated. Germany in the 1930s could be repeated. Not only that, it could be repeated here. It was
Mhm.
just mind blowing to find that out. And then so strange to suddenly find myself in the category that is targeted and attacked, like what we saw in Hitler's Germany. It's
Mhm.
the strangest turn of events that I think could possibly have happened. Talk about logic that is tough to wrap your brain around.
Absolutely, and, we were targeted in Hitler's Germany as well.
Mm,
I mean, hell, some of the most famous book burning photos were taken at the Sexual Institute, Magnus Hirschfeld Sexual Institute. We were put in prisons. We were put in camps, just like um, Jewish people, just like Romani people, just like Slavs, just like Catholics, just like homosexual people, just to name a category,
mm.
essentially.
And
Um,
that's so interesting because
yeah.
like all of history, and it furthers the narrative. We were erased completely from that. You hear about homosexuals getting the pink
The pink
triangle
triangle.
on their
Yeah.
uniforms and all of that, or painted onto their places of business. But you never hear about trans people back then, even though you're right, that was a big part of it. They went to the institute where the first
Mhm.
doctors were actually studying and making a lot of progress in
Mhm.
studying transgender people, and the fact that we existed, and why we were here. And even that just gets completely erased in the narrative, and so we find ourselves here where that the new narrative that trans people are kind of coming out of nowhere, this is a new fad, this is a new thing,
Right.
is getting traction,
Not
and
even
it's
close.
so
Yeah.
strange.
I mean, there is, one fascist tool is to harken back to a mythic past. And we see this a lot with Michael Knowles in general, but also others. This idea that trans people didn't exist until 2015, or trans kids didn't exist until 2015. It's always 2015 that they hone in on, or
Huh,
trans
okay.
people weren't accepted until 2015. And so, this again, this is harkening back to a mythic past. It's a tool that Hitler used. It's a tool that um, several fascists have used. I mean, make America great again. Things like that, right? Where basically you are steering people back to this mythologized, quote unquote, perfect past where everything was quote unquote perfect, even though it absolutely never was. And you fill their heads with these false memories of how things used to be. I mean, you saw that with, I believe it was the spirit of 1917 in Hitler's Germany. That was or 1914. I think it was 1917. Um, or 1927. I don't know. It was one of those years. But there were a couple of years that they would harken back to
Mm,
and say, we need to restore this spirit of such and such. I think it was 1917. But I mean, we're seeing the same exact tool being used right now by fascist mouthpieces like Michael Knowles
mm.
and others. Because he used it, now others are using it too. Um,
The one difference is that
yeah.
in Germany's case, there was actually something wrong. Was it the
Well, of course, they were in post-war Germany. Everything had been torn to shit.
yeah, and
I mean,
and
there
the restrictions
and
imposed on them strangled the country. Like, the country couldn't survive. The country was dying, and so it was
well,
those.
not completely, not completely. So, with the country was dying for sure after World War One. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But then the economy rebounded, and the Nazis said, and this is something that Trump is doing now, by the way. The Nazis projected that the economy was going to flatline in the near future. And then the Great Depression happened. So Germany was actually doing better in the 20s. And the reason the Nazis didn't catch on is because a lot of their message was the economic message. There was definitely a lot of anti-Semitism too, don't get me wrong. But one of their main talking points is that the economy's gonna crash, the economy's gonna crash. And everybody thought they were nuts. And then the economy did crash because of the Great Depression. And that helped propel the Nazis into power. Um, Obviously, Hitler was appointed, but you get the idea. And we're seeing that now with Trump. And Trump is saying that the economy is gonna crash. It's the
Mhm.
same exact thing. It's the same playbook. Exactly the same. Because if the economy does crash in the next 9 months for whatever reason, just like the Nazis, some people are going to view that as prophetic.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and what we're seeing right now in the news, and we need to get back to our stories,
yeah, we
but
do. We do.
the narrative that the economy is so terrible, even though
Mhm.
it's on a major upswing right now and has been doing really well the last year or so,
Yeah.
is being drowned out by the claims that the economy is still really bad, and so
Hmm. Yeah,
well,
we're seeing history rhyme a lot in a lot of different ways, and it's scary.
yeah.
It really genuinely is terrifying.
All right. On that positive note, let's move to Texas. A federal appeals court has issued an injunction against part of Texas's book banning law that requires book vendors to rate books for sexually explicit and sexually relevant materials. Vendors must submit those ratings every year to the Texas Education Agency, the agency overseeing public schools. The TEA can then overrule a vendor's rating and place vendors on a non-compliant list, forbidding schools from buying books from them if the vendors disagree with the TEA's decisions. Two Texas bookstores, Austin's Book People and Houston's Blue Willow Bookshop, filed a lawsuit against the 2023 restricting explicit and adult designated educational resources, aka Reader Act, calling the law overbroad and unconstitutional violation of their free speech rights. The bookstores were joined in their lawsuit by the American Booksellers Association, the Association of American Publishers, the Authors Guild, and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. On Wednesday, this would have been January 17th, a three-judge panel on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit ruled that an injunction against the aforementioned section of the Reader Act should remain in place because the booksellers in question are likely to suffer irreparable economic and reputational harm because of the law. Blue Willow Bookshop said that it had already lost $200,000 in business after the law was passed, as the Katy Independent School District had already paused all purchasing from it while awaiting for the business to comply with the new law. Because the bookseller makes 20% of its annual revenue through school sales, if it fails to comply with the law, it would lose a large part of its business. So, luckily, there is an injunction now while it's making its way all the way through the court. But I guess that's mostly positive news.
Absolutely.
Anything we can
It's
push
good
back
to
against
see
these bans.
It's good to see these bans blocked. And uh yeah, sorry, my mind's still stuck on the last segment, to be quite honest with you. Everything we were talking about there. It's just the entire thing is such a headache.
Yeah. All right. Let's